Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alastair.
And I'm Nick.
And in today's episode, the space drug addicts and religious warriors are back. Yes, we will be leading an uprising in Dune Part 2. Then we will be looking for our lost boyfriend on the high seas in the second season of 18th century LGBTQ+ pirate comedy, Our Flag Means Death. But before all of that, Nick, what have you been up to recently?
Well, I have been doing some belated catching up on my 2023 viewing. I have been watching the Netflix miniseries Beef, starring Stephen Ewan and Ali Wong, as two random people who have a chance encounter with each other in I believe, some sort of DIY store car park, a sort of road rage incident, and then proceed to become a little bit obsessed with one-upping each other and screwing each other over. They have beef with each other, if you will. And it turns out pretty inevitably that this is mostly a sort of a distraction, a bit of a displacement activity from the fact that they're both quite sad and dissatisfied with their own lives in various different ways. Ali Wong is playing Amy, an entrepreneur who is about to sell her business for like a 6-figure, 7-figure sum. And Stephen Ewan is playing Danny, a down-on-his-luck handyman who is struggling to get by. And they are both, in different ways, very dissatisfied with their lives under capitalism and or under the choices they made for themselves. They're annoying relatives, and they just seem very keen to throw themselves into this ludicrous feud. But obviously, it's really about how depressed they are. This is an A24 production via Netflix. It's a weird one, because honestly, I went into it expecting a bit more of a kind of borderline sitcom level, a sort of, I don't know, a real-world live-action Roadrunner cartoon, you know. And instead, it has a lot of moments like that. There's usually at least one moment every episode or two where they do something completely ludicrous to each other, and it's quite funny. But also, there's quite a lot of quite slow, thoughtful exploration of how sad their lives are and their inner turmoil. It's a strange show. It was very highly acclaimed last year. I meant to get around to watching it so I could possibly include it on my top 10 TV of the year, and then I didn't. But yeah, finally watching it now in March 2024, it's pretty good. Personally, I think it could stand to be a few episodes shorter. I think the slowness does sometimes get a bit much, but it is definitely an interesting series.
Yeah, that's the sort of standard critique we have of a lot of Netflix shows, that, you know, maybe tighten it up a bit. But I have heard lots of good things about this show. It's definitely on my, to catch up on 2023 list. It was possibly the biggest show of the year that I didn't watch. Yeah, when it came out, there was a lot of buzz, and then, other things happened, podcast commitments, and then, it kind of got left behind. But by the end of the year, it was one of those things where I was really like, yeah, I kind of regret missing that. It was basically that and The Diplomat were the two shows that people seem to like that I didn't watch.
Yeah, I can confirm both of those shows pretty good. I personally would slightly take The Diplomat over this, as I think The Diplomat actually felt like the rare Netflix series that was about the right length, whereas this feels very slightly overstretched. But it's still very good. I mean, Stephen Ewan, I think, has had a bit of a moment in the last few years. He's had a few acclaimed parts. He was in an Oscar-nominated movie that I can never remember the name of.
Minari?
That's the one.
Yeah, that's a good film.
Yeah, and he was also in The Walking Dead, which, well, if nothing else, certainly served to bring him to everyone's attention.
Yeah, it was very popular.
It was very popular, and I'm sure it enabled him to then go on and do these slightly more esoteric jobs that have got him a lot of acclaim. And yeah, he's really, really good in this. It's a difficult line to walk, because obviously both of the characters are kind of acting like little children a lot of the time. And keeping them both vaguely sympathetic, whilst also being kind of awful, and balancing these sort of cartoonish scenes of revenge with the sort of sad, semi-serious bits about the minutiae of their lives. It's a difficult balancing act, and both Stephen Ewan and Ali Wong do really pull it off, yeah. It's a really good showcase for them.
Yeah, and I think this is the first TV show that A24 have made or released. I mean, it is very much like, I feel, a badge of quality, the A24. They have put out some turkeys, but yeah, everyone's just collectively forgotten them in the film world. But I feel that, yeah, this is a big step for them going into television.
Yeah, it definitely has a very, unsurprisingly, A24 movie vibe about it. And yeah, good start for them doing that. I don't know what else their plans are, but yeah, I think they're doing a second season of this. I think possibly they're going to make it some sort of anthology show, and in the second season it's going to be two couples played by four different famous people beefing, which I would watch at this point.
Yeah, so the beef will continue, but it'll be different beef. A second serving of beef.
A different cut of beef, yeah.
Yeah.
Differently seasoned beef. Choose your own. Hilarious metaphor.
Joke.
Joke, hilarious. funny laugh. So yeah, no, this was really good. I would admit I haven't quite finished it yet. I probably would have watched the last couple of episodes by the time we released this podcast, but unless they completely crash into the side of the mountain, Roadrunner style, at the end of the season, then yeah, this is pretty good.
Yeah. No, I definitely want to track it down and watch it. Yeah, because it's been well received. I don't know, the sort of dark humour seems very much like my sort of thing, or at least that's the impression I got from the trailer.
Yeah. There's some of the more sort of grim moments of revenge, especially, and there's some good supporting characters who have even more sort of depressing, sordid lives than the main characters, and are sort of dragging the main characters down with them, who have some good moments as well. There's the Danny character's brother who's into crypto, and Amy's husband who's a bit of a sort of meek mama's boy.
That sounds good. Yeah, well, I'm glad that this does live up to the hype.
Yeah, no, good series. If you did miss it in 2023, then there's still time to watch it before season 2 comes out and you all start to feel hopelessly behind. So yeah, I've been beefing. Alastair, what have you done?
Well, this is the time when I look back on the Oscar films. We've discussed quite a few of them on the podcast, in both the recommendations section and in the main sort of review section. And the ceremony is, well, tomorrow, Sunday, American time, technically the small hours of Monday morning. So yeah, by the time this episode comes out, as we're recording on Saturday the 9th, everyone will know what the results are. And yeah, overall for the Oscars this year, it's been a strong year. Yeah, a really good slate of films. There's no ones I felt were especially bad, like Avatar getting nominated last year. The only one that's even like a bit forgettable was probably Maestro. Yeah, so it's been a good year. However, also this is one of the easiest years I feel to predict who the winners are.
Because it's going to really come back on you if I end up putting a bunch of honking noises underneath.
Yeah, this is really like going to be a whole eggs in one basket, betting it all on a single horse kind of moment. So this could be really embarrassing. Anyway, whilst I take my respectability and credentials as a film reviewer in my own hands, I'm going to tip basically Oppenheimer across the board. That's my predictions for tomorrow night. I feel this is a fairly safe prediction, but I do think it will be Oppenheimer's night. So yeah, but obviously there's always potential for a big upset. But I do think this is one of the easier years to predict the Oscars, when the past few years it seemed much more wide open. So I'm going to say that I think, Oppenheimer will win Best Film, Christopher Nolan to win Best Director, Cillian Murphy to win Best Actor, Robert Downey Jr. to win Best Supporting Actor. So those are, the main Oppenheimer ones. I feel that I'm going to tip Emma Stone for Best Actress in Poor Things. We both really liked that film, and I thought she did a great performance, down to everything from the way she moves in a sort of childlike and sort of slightly mannequin doll sort of way. So yeah, it's a really full body everything performance. So I think deserves an Oscar for that. For Best Supporting Actress, I'm going to tip Davina Joy Randolph for The Holdovers. Which is a great film, and I think she's really, really good in that. And then, in across the technical categories, more tips for Oppenheimer, probably best cinematography, set design, costume design, that sort of thing. So bets are in on Oppenheimer.
Okay. I mean, that doesn't sound very exciting, but also quite plausible. I gather Oppenheimer's been doing quite well in all the sort of pre-Oscar award ceremonies.
Yeah, that's partly what's motivated me to put everything on Oppenheimer. I feel that also, it seems to be kind of in the right place to win in that it is a really intense, interesting film. It's both got a lot of kind of meaty philosophical things, great performances, a lot of tension, well directed. There's a lot going for it. Zone of Interest, possibly a bit too weird, although it is absolutely devastating. And Past Lives I really, really liked, but it's just maybe a bit quiet for the Oscars. There's always potential for an upset. I mean, I'd be very happy, for example, if Jeffrey Wright walked away with Best Actor for American Fiction. Thought he was great in that. I would love to see wins for The Holdovers, Poor Things, Zone of Interest, as mentioned. I wouldn't be disappointed with any of those things. A bit surprised if Maestro walks away with the Best Picture nominee, Best Picture winner, but
that's this year's Whipping Boy, is it?
I don't know. It's just a little bit forgettable. Do you remember when we went to see Poor Things, and I was listing the Oscar films that I'd seen at that point, which was all of them apart from American Fiction because it hadn't been released, and I was just going, God, there's one more. Like, what is that film? I watched it the other day and I can't remember what it is. It's Maestro. But it's not bad.
I think I saw someone on Twitter sarcastically refer to American Fiction as this year's Oscar-nominated movie that we'll have forgotten by this time next year. Which, I don't know. I liked that film fine. I don't think it's that forgettable, but hey.
Yeah, I saw Gabia Baker Whitelaw posting that on Blue Sky.
Oh, but I wasn't going to name and shame, but you go ahead.
Oh, sorry. But no, I think it's... I mean, she's completely right about Mank being the film that everyone forgets was not only exists, but was nominated for loads of Oscars. I don't know if she's making a point that basically people are likely to forget the black film, because of structural racism. But
possibly. From her tone, I think she is more suggesting that it just wasn't a very interesting or memorable film.
Yeah, well, we obviously liked it a lot. Obviously, we liked it a lot. There's obviously difference of opinion between critics, but
I mean, I haven't seen Maestro. I don't know how boring Maestro is. It certainly doesn't sound like something I want to watch. I mean, I've seen 4, maybe 5 of the Oscar films this year. It may just be 4. So I've certainly nowhere near a majority.
The thing is, if you haven't seen, say, The Holdovers or Zone of Interest, I'd recommend anyone listening to go out and see those before you watch Maestro. I mean, Maestro is on Netflix, so it's kind of easy to watch. I mean, Zone of Interest is a very particular film. Most people will find it too upsetting to watch. I nearly did. But it is also brilliant. I am actually going to tip Zone of Interest for Best Foreign Language Film. I think that's exactly where it will probably land. And also I've got my documentary prediction, which is 20 Days in Maripol, partly because it's the only one I've heard of that's on the list. Which means it's probably the high-profile one. But yeah, I will try and track down those documentaries at some point. Apologies to the great medium and documentary filmmaking that gets every single thing it produces in 1 year rammed down to just one category. So yeah, always potential for an upset. Sometimes it's been in the bag. I mean, I was blown away and loved the fact that Parasite won, which was completely a dark horse. So yeah, these things, surprises can happen.
Yep, I think the only big top line category you haven't mentioned is Best Animated Film.
Yes. Which that one, I think, pretty much a shoe in for The Boy and the Heron. Miyazaki, it's beautiful. I loved it. Could be his final film. It's a great film about grief and loss, the magical power of youth and innocence. I feel, as possibly the most serious of the animated films, it's probably got the edge. And Miyazaki, great director. So, although obviously it'd be nice if Nimona won, because that was a good film.
Yes, and there's also Spider-Verse, obviously, although they have already won for a film that was quite similar in many ways to the one they just released. I feel like they may well feel more inclined to give it to a film that, as you say, is more of a serious autorial work about loss than a film about different flavours of Spider-Man.
Yeah, and also I guess because it's the second in a trilogy, the first one won, the third one might also win as well. Although maybe, there are films that win across the board. So, and it is beautiful. It's an amazing animated film. I feel that it's one of those films when if only people who made animated films voted for the best animated film Oscar, they might go for Spider-Verse because of the animation. But because it's everyone voting, it will be people who will judge things on other criteria. The animated film won't just be judged on the animation and the animated storytelling, so to speak. Just kind of the way it works. Just as people who know nothing about sound editing get to vote on who the best sound editor Oscar is, so they just vote for the film they think's the best. Again, which is why Oppenheimer likely to pick up a lot of prizes, especially in the technical categories.
I thought the sound editing on Oppenheimer was... I don't know, maybe I'm not smart enough to tell you what sound editing is specifically, but I thought the sound as a whole on Oppenheimer was a big part of the atmosphere.
Actually, you are 100% right. That is possibly me being a little bit facetious. I always choose, as a weird example from the technical Oscar list, sound editing, because most people aren't even aware that exists. As this is a discipline in its own right. People are probably aware that there's an Oscar for editing, there's an Oscar for sound design. Yes, there are, but there's also a specific one for sound editing. It's a way to say that there's a very specific set of technical skills that a large number of people who don't have that skills vote on. But Oppenheimer, I mean, it deserves to win, partly for the same reason things like Titanic and Lord of the Rings, Gladiators swept the board, because a film that good is firing on every cylinder. It's nothing is left undeployed effectively to make a great cinematic experience. And it was both our favourite films of last year, so I'd be very happy if it won.
Yeah, no, I think Oppenheimer, it does look like it's going to end up striding atop 2024, even though Barbie might have been the more mainstream winner. I think Oppenheimer probably gets to be the big Oscar bait of the year.
Yeah, I think Barbie wins the box office contest. It made more money in the end. The only other big potential for upset, obviously, is The Killers of Flower Moon, partly because, Scorsese, great director, famously snubbed a lot of times at the Oscars, although he did get his best director for The Departed eventually. And, he's getting towards the end of his career, although, no sign of him retiring. He might continue making films into his 90s, who knows. And obviously he's brought together both his two great muses, De Niro and DiCaprio, in one film. So there's a chance that, that might actually be the dark horse that sweep lots of things. I mean, I liked it. Thought it was good. I preferred Oppenheimer. But, there's another potential, upset coming from that angle.
We'll just have to wait and see. Well, except for the people listening to this podcast who will already know whether Alastair was right thanks to the noises.
Yeah, you'll be able to either, enjoy celebrating my success with me or chastise me for my public embarrassment, as I've just humiliated myself by tipping Oppenheimer of everything, where of course the across the board winner turns out to be Killers of Flower Moon.
Yep.
Yeah, so it could be totally wrong.
Scorsese does it again. Okay, and first up today, and does it seem a bit weird, but I'm the one introducing this? When it's probably Alastair's most anticipated cinematic moment of the year? Maybe, but at least it means he gets to give his opinion on it first. So, this is of course Dune Part 2, the continuation of Dune from a few years ago, in which Paul Atreides, played by Timothée Chalamet, has gone out into the desert of Arrakis after his entire family were massacred in the previous film, where he will meet up with the Fremen people to fight back against the evil aristocracy who killed his family and are now trying to harness the spice of Arrakis for financial reasons. It's a massive, sweeping sci-fi fantasy epic. We have both seen it. Alastair, as I say, is a big fan of this whole series franchise. So, what did you think of this film?
Well, unsurprisingly, I loved it. I think there's a lot of hype around this film and there's a lot of good reviews, and I think it lives up to the expectations. It was spectacular. It's got epic battles, beautiful cinematography. It's tense. It's quite a long film, but I felt totally entertained and engrossed throughout the whole thing. What I liked about it is, many things, but it's got this sort of rich sci-fi world, which is in the books, and they've managed to bring the complexity of that to the screen. All the different factions, the different elements of the mythology, the politics, it's all brought in there. I think that's the only way to successfully do a Dune film, is to bring as much of the book onto the screen to kind of really get the kind of rich world across. And that's why this is the kind of, definitive adaptation of the books. It really captures the complex and multifaceted story of the books. Loads of things like, the Lisan al-Gaib, Missionary Protectiva, the kind of the relationship between the houses, the different factions, the politics of the empire, they're all brought in. But also the political side, such as having Paul as this charismatic leader that leads everyone to death and destruction, and the warning the book has about, if you follow a charismatic leader, that will leave you to, who marries sort of religion and politics, will lead to kind of mass death and violence. And they do embrace the darker sides, like having Paul becoming a monster as the film goes along, Cheney turning against him, all that kind of the meaty, complex, difficult to put on screen stuff that's in the book is there, and that's what makes it a great film.
Yeah, no, I more or less agree. This is extremely watchable, despite my long-running grudge against long films. This one is long, but did not feel long. Honestly, it felt shorter than the first one, even though the first one was about, I think, 10 minutes shorter. Just because, obviously, I think a lot of this is sort of building action, whereas the first one had a lot of world building to do. Plus, all the gorgeous visuals you'd expect in a Denis Villeneuve movie. I've seen a few of his movies now, and I wasn't massively enamoured with the first Blade Runner when we saw it for this podcast, which might be sacrilege, but hey, I thought the Villeneuve sequel was incredibly engaging, and this is great as well. It does a good job of really sort of immersing you in the world and bringing out a lot of the concepts without becoming a boring lecture. And there's a lot of good, viscerally thrilling bits. Timothée Chalamet, who I've never disliked, but this is definitely the most I've enjoyed a performance by him. I think he's definitely really disappeared into the character in a way that's very good. And Zendaya also reliably good here, as she is in basically everything.
Yeah, it's perfectly cast, I would say. They've absolutely excelled. Yeah, Timothée Chalamet is great. He's the right age for the character. He's got the right level of magnetism that you could believe that, he is someone that people would think of as a prophet and follow him into war because he's got that charisma. Rebecca Ferguson playing Jessica gets probably built out a bit more than maybe in the book as a character, has a bit more emotional complexity to her. They do lean into the possibly she's gone mad after taking the water of life. and they use her character to really build up the kind of the mythology of the Lisan al-Gaib, the voice from the outer world that they exploit in order to create this religious war, which is what the Atreides use to get back at the Harkonnens. And yeah, they kind of use her character to build up the fact that they are manipulating the Fremen, exploiting them, turning them into their cannon fodder in their war. Yeah, and I thought she's good in the role. Christopher Walken as the Emperor, again, yeah, does good villain, does good charismatic kind of authority figure. Yeah, I mean, you could just keep going down the list. Florence Pugh as Irulan, difficult character to get right, as, yeah, she's kind of in the background for a lot of the book. But yeah, they give her some agency and, yeah, use her character to explain a lot of the wider politics, bring that in, make it dramatic. And obviously, yeah, all the Harkonnens are suitably evil and horrible. Yeah, Stellan Skarsgård doing the Baron is, yeah, just very disgusting. Austin Butler, terrifying as Fade Ralpha, just, yeah, really gets across the violence and sadism.
Yeah, his introduction was great, yeah.
Yeah, that is a whole amazing sequence. Pretty much all done in black and white. The Gidi Prine sequence with him killing his way through various Atreides captives. Yeah, and Dave Bautista as Beast Raban, when they really let him go full out on the anger and impulsiveness of the character. So yeah, I mean, I feel one of the really great strengths of this film is, you know, note for note, perfect casting. I mean, you can continue to go down the quite long cast list. Javier Bardem, Josh Brolin, you know, kind of everyone who turns up is great.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's especially because obviously this is a very sort of broad, sweeping epic, so a lot of the characters are only getting a couple of scenes, and yeah, it's very much on them to create an impression in that space of time, and they've got a powerful enough cast that they can actually do that.
Yeah, and each one kind of makes the most of their moments.
Yeah, I did enjoy Dave Bautista especially, though. He's really going for it as this aggressive, yet also slightly pathetic character.
Yeah, and it's a hard character to get right because he's very much the kind of most cartoon villain of the Harkonnens because he's just angry and violent. Whereas, yeah, the Baron is scheming, and yeah, Fade Ralpha is cunning as well. Dave Bautista's got a real knack for doing both comedy and action, which is hard to do. But yeah, here he's just going full on kind of horrible bully. I think my partner described it as kind of the character's like Drax, but without all the nice bits.
Yeah, he's both a bully and he's quite, as I say, he's quite pathetic in a slightly embarrassing way. He's clearly looked down on by all the other Harkonnens. And yeah, it's a good performance. And yeah, there's still a lot of sort of good Game of Thrones style sort of courtroom politics backstabbing as well, which is dramatised without taking away from the large amount of time given over to desert action. There's the Sandworms, obviously, the iconic Dune Sandworm. Very, very well realised here, getting a bit more screen time than it did in the first one. Someone did ask at one point on the internet, how do they get off the Sandworms? Are they ever shown getting off the Sandworms? And the answer seems to be no, but I'm sure there's a way.
I think it's described in the book. In the book, they say the way they make the sandworms turn over is that they cut the surface on one bit so that it rubs against the sand. So the sandworm turns to put the bit that's rubbing against the sand not against the sand, and that's how they make them turn. The book is the sort of thing that's thought out everything in small amounts of detail. Although, yeah, the film is a bit vague. The sequence of Paul riding the first sandworm is thrilling. Yeah, it's just, again, amazing direction from Denis Villeneuve.
Yeah, especially considering that presumably a lot of the things in that sequence didn't really exist. It's but I don't know how much of this is real. I'm assuming they were in an actual desert filming with actual sand.
They filmed in Jordan, I think.
Okay.
Partly because Jordan did a big travel advertising campaign. Advertisers, come look at our beautiful desert, as seen on Dune. So yeah, they shot in some desert, but probably also a lot on the green screen as well.
Yeah, and as I say, it looks gorgeous. I mean, I think Denis Villeneuve has this sort of quite high contrast, iconic style, which in some ways almost makes it easier to make it work rather than trying to make it look realistic, if what I'm saying makes any sense. But yeah, it does end up looking really good.
Yeah, there's a slight level of artifice to it, but that's partly because you're in a sort of fantasy sci-fi space, things like that. Yeah, like the Harkonnen world basically being black and white, things like that. There's sort of the elaborate costuming is part of it. The music, is sort of very discordant, slightly unsettling. There's quite a few sort of just long shots of deserts with kind of quite dark, disturbing music on it. I just totally dig the aesthetic of this film. All the buildings are kind of brutalist and inhospitable. It's a kind of quite cold, dead, violent world, both literally because it's a desert planet, but just kind of emotionally and things like that, and then there's this sort of kind of, industrial Harkonnen element to it. It kind of weaves in a lot of different kind of quite dark aesthetics. Which is one of the reasons why it's just beautiful to look at, especially in IMAX.
Yeah, we saw it on a very big screen, a screen the size of 4 double-decker buses, according to the nice person who introduced it. And Yeah, and we were also for quite far forward, so it was very much filling up my entire field of vision.
Yeah, I felt like I was in the midst of the sand.
Yeah, very gritty viewing experience, very gritty.
Yeah. But yeah, it lends itself to the immersive nature of the story. And again, Villeneuve's really good at building these worlds you could feel you're lost in. I think I've seen most of his recent films in IMAX because you kind of want, with that sort of level of spectacle, you want the biggest screen you can.
Yeah, I must admit, part of me, spoilers, I guess. Mild spoilers for the ending of Dune 2. I'm not going to spoil what actually happens, I'm just going to sort of vaguely spoil the feeling of it. Okay, I'm going to do it now. I was almost slightly disappointed that this also ended on a bit of a to be continued. I guess because I got the impression this was like the second half of a book, and then the third film, if they make it, is going to be a different book. But this one would actually have an ending. But it really does have kind of another to be continued.
I mean, he's been fairly upfront that this is going to be like a trilogy, and I think that's what audiences expect from sci-fi and things like that. But similar to the first film, whereas the first film made the bold decision to take a big book and actually add more plot by doing a few scenes that Villeneuve had written that take place before the book opens. They did a similar thing in this, which is when you get to the end, you get actually a few scenes that are after the action of the book is finished. I don't want to, again, spoil for people who haven't seen the film yet, or maybe haven't read the book, what the actual end of the film is. But obviously there's a sequel. In fact, there are 5 sequel books and a lot of other extended universe stuff. So the plot continues. So you kind of get, after the events of the book finishes, you get another couple of scenes on the end of this film kind of propelling to the next kind of story bit. So yeah, I'm being purposely vague again with the people who haven't seen it, but like there's the kind of big events that form the basis of the second book are included kind of on the end of this film, which helps give it forward momentum. It's not as much a hard stop as if they just stopped it where the book stops. People will probably feel, oh yeah, that's a good 2-part story, done now, and would lessen the enthusiasm for a third part. Always leave them wanting more is, I guess, an entertainment maxim. But I suppose for what it gains in momentum towards the third part, it loses in closure on this story.
Well, yeah, but I guess realistically, yes. If we're talking modern trilogy structure, it is, I guess, traditional that probably the second part has a cliffhanger. If anything, as many people have said, the first part didn't so much have a cliffhanger as just sort of stop.
Yeah, partly because it only stops in the middle of a story. It kind of stops in the middle of a part because the book's in 3 parts and that's not the end of one of the parts. But I don't know, it's got this sort of sense of more going on and things like that. And a lot of the characters are introduced for this part 2, like Florence Pugh's character, especially Princess Irulan, will be bigger in the third part. But obviously she's used well in this film, linking up the kind of Bene Gesserit schemes and plans, which again they're continued in this film and will become a major element of the third film, should it happen.
No, it seems like this film has done quite well, so they'll probably do a third one, I imagine. It may just be a question of when they can schedule this or when Denis Villeneuve wants to do it.
Yeah, it's grossing vast amounts of money. Also, it depends on what they want to do about casting, because there's a time jump if they want to recast people. But yeah, I guess we'll wait and see. One of the things I did like about this film is also I felt every change they made to the book was the right change. It's not like a 100% faithful adaptation, although it is probably the most faithful adaptation that exists. But yeah, I think the few changes they made were the right ones. The biggest change is, no Alia in this film, although she sort of briefly mentioned and appears in some kind of spice-induced drug sequences. But yeah, they decided to not have a psychotic 2-year-old running around killing people, as maybe that would take away from the seriousness they were aiming at. Yeah, and having an older Alia would just make the time not work like at all if they wanted to have like a 10 or 15 year jump in time rather than 2 years as the book has. So yeah, no Alia, probably the right decision to make. Yeah, having Gurney Halleck's revenge scene on screen, bringing that in because it takes place off screen in the book, which is a little bit disappointing. Yeah, and also the decisions to bring in some of the wider stuff, have more scenes with the Imperial royal family and the Bene Gesserit scheming, having those in really help broaden out the world, which you might think for like, a 2-film project that's over 5 hours in total running time, you think like making it bigger and more epic might not be the intuitive thing to do, or making it longer, but actually it needed that bigger sense to get across the rich world of the book. So yeah, those decisions to expand those plot bits and make it seem more consistent were the right decisions to make.
Yeah, I feel like, I haven't read Dune for a long time. My memory of the psychotic toddler part is quite vague. I feel like I don't know. It's one of these things that people are probably disappointed wasn't in it because, they think it'd be a fun thing to have on screen. But it probably wouldn't have fit particularly well with the tone of this specific version of Dune. I can imagine an adaptation of Dune in which you could have a psychotic toddler, but I'm not sure this is that one.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right there. It doesn't fit with this vibe. If you want psychotic toddler action, you can go and watch the David Lynch one, which really does max out on the murderous 2-year-old. I guess also staying away from that is probably one of their main objectives with this. But then the other thing about this version is it has also a lot more emotional and political complexity than previous adaptations. So yeah, both the sci-fi version and the David Lynch version, they lean it more into a straight up Paul's just like a heroic, fighter figure fighting an evil empire and the bloodthirsty Harkonnens. He's just an inspirational leader with magic powers who fights for good against evil. Whereas, again, this one, what makes it great is it digs into the surface a bit more, has starting a religious war, armed with nuclear weapons, not necessarily a good thing and something that a nice, clean-cut hero sort of person does. So yeah, having that in, I felt really worked for me.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't read the second book, but I gather you're going to get a lot more into Paul Atreides. Is he bad, actually, in the second one? And yes, they're clearly setting that up.
Yeah. And I think by locating that in the conflict between the Zendaya Cheney character and Timothée Chalamet's Paul, again, puts it on screen a bit more, the kind of broad philosophical, political questions about, Paul's descent into megalomania and violence is kind of, made more apparent by his first falling in love and then Cheney turning against him. So, yeah, which is, again, there's not as much of that in the book. In the book, Cheney's more of a kind of just supportive companion figure and lover, whereas, they gave a more emotional complexity here, which builds up the character, but also brings in this wider political and philosophical issues.
So if that's going to be a major plot point, presumably they're going to have to diverge even more substantially in the next book.
I mean, it's been a while since I've read the second one, so you'll see where it's going to go. There's quite a lot of the sort of political intrigue, love triangle in the third one between Irulan, Cheney and Paul is a major bit of the second book. Also, one of the good decisions they made here is Irulan is less of a captured war bride and more of a scheming Bene Gesserit in her own right. When she gets to the end of the story, you get the feeling that is she manipulating Paul rather than just being a captured war bride. So, I think they'll probably build that element out more in the next film. And, they'll also probably have more of Paul, mass murdering monster, probably again brought out through the Cheney character. We'll have to wait and see the take that Villeneuve goes for it, but you can see the elements of that in place already from this film.
Yeah, if nothing else, I'm interested to see what the third film could possibly do. Yeah, I guess that's it really. I'm on board. Well done me. As someone who isn't that into Dune, they've got me sufficiently into Dune. Will I watch this TV show they're meant to be making later in the year? I don't know, but I'll definitely watch the third film.
Well, it depends if it's good or not. I guess we'll have to wait and see. Yeah, like what the reaction is. I mean, it's going to be an original story, so it's not an adaptation of one of the books or pieces of side media. But I think you're exactly right. For this to succeed, it had to bring on the non-Dune heads. It's the same for any large franchise kind of blockbuster thing, like Marvel, Spider-Man, X-Men, whatever, or Batman film. Like it has to reach out to the point when it's not just the people who love it. And this has actually connected, considering it's like a mad book about space drug addicts fighting religious wars. It seems to have found resonance with a wide audience, through great storytelling and great performances and acting. Teenage me is really thrilled that Dune could be one of the big cultural talking points rather than this like weird book that weirdos read. I think it's great that it's that everyone seems invested in this. Partly I think the appeal for that is it's straight up doing the thing that it's doing with no irony or sarcasm. Like there's no meta commentary in it. There's wider politics and philosophy, but nothing against films that lean into the irony and the sarcasm to make them entertaining. I've enjoyed many films like that. We've got another Deadpool film coming this year. But I do feel we've had a lot of that in the last few years or even few decades. And this is a refreshing change of tone, which I think is one thing that wider audiences are responding to.
Yeah, I think it is refreshing to have this quite po-faced sci-fi, this taking it fairly seriously sci-fi, rather than the more knowing sense of humour that has become quite prevalent in a lot of films, well, Marvel films and films heavily inspired by Marvel films. So, I think it's good and interesting to have that around. So I'll be interested to see if we now get a wave of post-Dune films, or if everyone just concludes that the specific combination of Villeneuve doing Dune is something they can't just copy.
I'm sure there'll be attempts to copy it. I mean, Hollywood's casting around for something else to be the next big thing. We've got a real slowdown in superhero films this year. You mentioned in your summary of 2023, video games could be a new avenue, and I think that's very likely. But another big avenue that's really not explored by Hollywood in its history is classic sci-fi novels. We've got Apple's done Foundation. It's all right. Villeneuve's had huge success with Dune. I've heard Villeneuve say he'd like to do Rendezvous with Rama, which is another classic sci-fi novel, more from the sort of Asimov period. But yeah, I can imagine that being a spectacular film. There's gajillions of other epic sci-fi novels to adapt. Maybe we'll see more of this in the Dune, or like as you say, maybe people will be like, well, Villeneuve can do it, but the average jobbing studio director can't.
I think it's mostly that this is one of these things where what appeals about these films, it's just that they're really good. It's just that it's an incredibly high quality cast and a very specific director who has a specific style and vision. And it's not that they're adapting an old sci-fi novel, it's that they're doing it incredibly well.
Yeah, exactly.
Although, it seems facetious and obvious to say, well, the key to having a hit film is to make a good film. But I do think that's probably more key to the success of this than the fact that it's Dune.
Yeah, and the exact same thing can be said about Barbie, obviously the huge hit of last year, which is that the takeaway from Barbie should not be people want more films based on toys. It's that, you make a great film with a great cast, great writing, great directing. That's what people respond well to. And it's tapping into something about the time. I feel this Dune film, it's a serious film for a serious time in history, and it's difficult and challenging film for a difficult, challenging time in history. And yeah, like you say, it suits the time, and trying to replicate that will be difficult. So, there are a lot of sci-fi books that are easier to adapt than Dune. Dune is especially challenging for its weirdness and mysticism and complex politics. I can see how a lot of sort of like space army thrillers could be turned into, profitable films, but they probably won't be the sensation that Dune is.
No, probably not. Okay, and last up today, it's another thing that is beloved among some people, although not Alastair in this case. This is the second season of Our Flag Means Death, the pirate drama made by HBO Max in America and eventually shown on the BBC here, about Stede Bonnet, the gentleman pirate who gets bored of his life in aristocracy, has a midlife crisis, and decides to run off and become a pirate. In a lot of ways, it's a lot like Dune. But instead of becoming a crazed religious messiah, Stede Bonnet meets up with Blackbeard, played by Taika Waititi, and they fall in love. At the end of the first season, the two of them have been separated after Stede Bonnet decided he should make an effort to go back to his posh life, and Blackbeard, broken-hearted, turned hard back to becoming a bloodthirsty pirate, and now we pick up in the second season with everything a bit rough. Alastair, we've both seen the whole of this second, and it turns out last season, because the show has now sadly been cancelled. What did you think of it?
Yeah, I enjoyed it a lot. It's funny. It's quite sweet and quite a loving show, considering it's also about pirates, and there is a fair amount of murder or violence in it. Although a lot of the people who are killed are sort of like faceless British Navy soldiers who are, just bad guys. But it is a really sweet, quite loving, nice show. Yeah, I feel that like this season, they needed to move the sort of story on a bit. So they created a will they, won't they get back together, story between Stede Bonnet and Blackbeard with sort of various bits of tension going back and forth. And I guess that was kind of needed because, the first, season was about two people finding each other. Where do you go with the second season without kind of creating artificial drama? I feel that there's appropriate amount of kind of relationship tension in this season. Any more might have got a bit artificial. If anything, it's probably good that it kind of ends up with two seasons, a kind of nice, neat plot that sort of wraps up at the end. We might come to the ending in more detail. But it did, I think, preserve the humour, especially kind of the humour from the wacky characters of the first season, which kept it entertaining.
Yeah, my view on this season kind of evolved as it went along. I felt the first few episodes I was slightly disappointed by. I felt like they'd maybe fallen into the trap of some popular shows that quickly amass a devoted fandom of ending up maybe taking their central ship a bit too seriously and making a show that was a bit of an overly melodramatic bummer and didn't actually have any of the fun we liked of the first one. Like, I don't know, by about episode 2 of season 2, I was a bit sort of, come on. Good lord, just get the characters back together and go back to having fun. You've only got 8 episodes. How long are you going to drag this out? And thankfully, by the end of episode 3, start of episode 4, they had more or less stopped dragging it out. and the second half of the season was a lot more fun. But the first half, I will admit, did slightly get away from what I actually liked about the show. But the second half, very good.
Yeah, I guess they were trying to create artificial tension by having Steed and Blackbeard separate, and this whole will they find each other again, with Steed throwing messaging bottles into the sea, which is a bit funny at least. But the problem is that, like, does anyone really feel there is tension? They're obviously going to get together at the end. It's the sort of show that, you know, likes to give out happy endings, so it lacked tension. But then they got the characters together in the second half, yeah, and they got them back together in the initial setting of on the ship, and then sailing around the seas. And once that dynamic's established, then or re-established, then there was, like, yeah, more scope for jokes and humour.
Well, it seems like it's a thing that sometimes happens to some shows where they do a big cliffhanger and then they think, you know, we did this cliffhanger, it shouldn't matter, you know, we shouldn't just undo it like that at the start of the next episode. Which, you know, isn't entirely wrong-headed. It does sometimes feel a bit cheap when that happens. See the start of Series 7 of Red Dwarf, which is a particularly niche reference, but anyway.
Yeah, there's one. Yeah, or a lot of Marvel previews, which when they unwind the thing, you know, with the end credit sequence because it's been ages and they want to do something different with the film.
Yeah, so yeah, I can understand the desire not to do that, but on the other hand, I think dragging out the resolution of this cliffhanger over like 3 and a bit episodes before we actually got back to the thing people like about the show. Yeah, if they'd had a 22 episode season, I would maybe be more forgiving towards this, but in an 8 episode season, that seems a bit much.
Yeah, especially as we're here for the dynamic of these characters, and like kind of it's a show that kind of puts its characters front and center and kind of has their interaction. Very much the appeal of the show is kind of the weird and wacky people being weird and wacky people in various combinations. So yeah, it's not the sort of show where people go on like big kind of quests of self-discovery or kind of, you know, often their own like, you know, things. So yeah, that's not kind of what it's aimed at.
Well, no, it is what I believe one might call a hangout show, and you know, it's about the characters hanging out together, and it becomes notably less fun when the characters are not hanging out and are all strung out, miserable and staring at walls. As I say, you could do that as an episode to show that things are bad and things have changed, but doing half a series of it is kind of verging on, I don't know, tying your own hands together.
Yeah. There's a nice sort of like progression with the characters, so they kind of given a bit more. Obviously, yeah, we've talked about the Steed and Blackbeard plot line, which is kind of like the main plot line, but it's got such a big and like great cast. I must say, I did really like Ewan Brenner from Trainspotting, just again as the kind of crazy Scottish mystic. He's just again always funny in every episode. There's one brilliant episode when he's trying to turn himself into a seagull that's just extremely funny. I thought David Fane as the pirate Fang, he's just really funny. Nathan Ford, he's great. Joel Fry, Matthew Maher, Samson Ko. I mean, it's just a great comedy cast.
Yeah, I thought there was a good character arc in this one for Izzy Hands, played by Con O'Neill, the sort of ruthless first mate of Blackbeard from the first season, who has a bit of growth in this year as well. His story arc's probably one of the highlights of this season, actually. It's good stuff.
Yeah, it's one of the sort of most substantial story arcs, and his character actually goes through real change from kind of like, you know, kind of, well, hating Steed and being a horrible, hard-bitten pirate to actually like nice, well-adjusted, full member of the crew, you know, integrated with the kind of quite silly crew of the Revenge rather than being like a hardcore pirate. Yeah,
no, it's a nice little story, and especially because this ends up being the final season, even though I think the showrunner has said he'd have liked to do at least one more. The ending of Izzy Hand's arc, along with the various bits of Steed and Blackbeard's, does provide something that does feel like an ending. I can see the tendrils they were stretching out to do a third season, but it doesn't feel like a bad ending if you just ignore that one scene hinting at other stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And I know, I guess, spoilers for this show that's more of a, like I say, comedy hangout than a plot thing, but if you don't want the actual end spoiled for you, then run away now. Final chance. Just gotta have a few notes on the very last bit. Like, yeah, the last bit of the last episode, when it just pretty much kind of, the other people sail off in the Revenge, their ship, and yeah, Steed and Blackbeard just decide to live in a cabin by the beach and have like a nice couple life. It's a very sweet ending, and it's really the appropriate ending for the show, but it does feel a little bit like we were told last minute that we're not getting another season, so the last scene has to be the happy ending.
I genuinely don't know if that was going to be, you know, yeah, basically if they knew it was likely to be cancelled, or maybe if they thought it might be cancelled, so they'll take a punt, and if they're not cancelled, they can always just undo it.
I mean, yeah, who knows whether, you know, it works on both levels, but it did feel a bit kind of like, right, wrap up, happy ending right now, but which is good. I mean, like I say, it's a show about, you know, positive LGBTQ plus relationships where everyone loves each other and gets on well and overcomes the obstacles put in their path. So it was absolutely the right ending to go with as a show, and has a quite sort of funny bit when they realise how rustic their cabin is. But yeah, it's the right ending.
Yeah, and I mean, I think for a lot of people, the focus of this show is, Rhys Darby and Taika Waititi as Steed and Blackbeard, and they are very good. They do have an undisputable chemistry that really works. They're very different characters, but in a way that works well together. In a similar way to what I said last time about Mr. and Mrs. Smith.
Yeah, and you're really here for them and their chemistry. And they're both like great comedy performers. Especially Rhys Darby, especially who's good in so many things, from like Flight of the Conchords, one of the standout sort of comedy parts in those recent Jumanji films that they've done. Whenever he turns up, he's just very funny. And yeah, Taika Waititi also, great comedy performer. I thought he was great in everything from Free Guy to the Marvel stuff he's done. So, you're kind of really there for them as a couple, their chemistry, the kind of the silliness and wackiness of the characters, which, they both do silly and wacky very well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a nice sort of story arcs of both serious and silly stuff. Like, there's a good plot thread with, Steed actually finally starting to become good at being a pirate. And then combined with an extremely silly storyline where Blackbeard decides to quit and become a fisherman.
Yeah, that's very funny. Yeah.
That was incredibly funny, and basically just lasts about a day before the fishermen he's glommed onto just angrily chase him away from their boat for being shit at being a fisherman. Which was hilarious. So yeah, but once we get to the comedy, after a few episodes of slight miserablism, it is still very good and silly and funny, yet somehow also emotionally resonant.
Yeah, which is exactly what you want from this show. I also really liked Ruby O'Quain, who was introduced as the kind of queen of the pirates. I know this is a show that's primarily about gay men hanging out and having loving, fulfilling relationships. So it seems a bit unfair to maybe focus in on one of the straight women characters in the show. But I thought she was very good at being both a sort of sometimes menacing villain, but also a kind of relatable, nice person, as all the characters in the show pretty much are, and kind of, again, added a new dynamic by throwing in a new character. Yeah, and her sort of relationship with the Samson Kayo character is quite sweet and funny. So yeah, that was another interesting dynamic they added for the second season that I think works quite well.
Yeah, no, it's good. They do a good job of managing what is quite a large ensemble in quite a short season of like half-hour episodes. They do somehow give everyone something to do.
Yeah, everyone gets like a comedy moment, doesn't that, or something that moves their plot forward. I mean, some of the nicest bits is towards the end when all the characters are basically on one ship. So, and in this sort of tight sense. I mean, that's your kind of classic sitcom setup. Few small locations, lots of characters together, hilarity ensues.
Yeah, I mean, I was worried during the first few episodes they were going to stretch the miserable bit out for the entire season, but happily they didn't. We did, as you say, get a few good episodes towards the end, with everyone just getting to hang out.
Yeah, it's a show of a real nice vibe. Again, there's a lot of LGBTQ relationships in this one. Again, the women characters falling in love with another woman, which was a nice touch as well. But it's kind of nice how just like there's absolutely no homophobia in the world of this show. Everyone's just like it's just men loving men, and everyone's cool with it. And it gives the show a really nice kind of warm, friendly vibe, which you kind of want from this, again, a sort of hangout sitcom.
Yeah, no, it's a good time. You can see why this show became like a cult favourite. Yeah, it's just a nice time. It's just a pleasant, nice thing to watch. I think the first season was slightly stronger, but it's still very pleasant. By the end of the second season, I was very much fully in on the characters again. And I was, a bit sad that we will probably never get to see them again.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I guess overall probably, I don't know if it's the first season because it was fresher. It's always the thing with first seasons, but I felt the first one may have been a bit funnier and kind of, the kind of emotional stakes maybe seemed a bit higher because it was about people falling in love, whereas this one is kind of like them getting back together when they inevitably will.
Well, it's mostly a romantic comedy, isn't it, really? And that is the arc of most rom-coms.
Yeah, no, which is a good point, which is a very good point. Yeah, so possibly first season a bit stronger, but this was still very enjoyable.
Yeah, I believe it's all on iPlayer. If you haven't watched it, then it's all there now. It's not going anywhere. It's not getting any longer.
That's all we have time for in this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence. If you have enjoyed this episode, then please subscribe in your podcatcher of choice, or visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can hear other issues of the podcast, listen to bonus audio clips, or read written pieces by Nick and myself.
Or you can follow us on social media, where we are MFV Podcast on Twitter, Moderate Fantasy Violence on Facebook, and I believe we're now on Blue Sky, for those of you who are on that advanced, new, exciting form of social media that resembles Twitter from about 15 years ago. And I, of course, am also on all these networks. I am Nick Bryan if you search, and then my little red avatar will come up. Nick MB on Twitter, Nick Bryan on Blue Sky, a different username everywhere. And you can also follow the pre-launch page for my next comics Kickstarter, which is slowly revving into life. That's Courier Z, a comic about a space post woman.
You can find more from me on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Instagram by searching for Alastair Ball. You can also find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com, or find my theatre reviews at everythingtheatre.com. Or you can join us here next time for a superhero double bill. We'll be discussing the new issues of Ultimate Spider-Man, written by podcast favourite Jonathan Hickman, and we'll be diving into the second season of Extraordinary, the British superhero comedy about the hapless woman in a world of superheroes. So join us in 2 weeks to find out what we made of those. Until then, goodbye.
Bye.